for the first time ever, the Supreme Court broadcast audio from its oral arguments live.
The point here is that the distinction...
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas?
Yes, Ms. Ross, a couple of questions.
Normally, people have to wait in line and brave the elements in order to win a prize seat in the court's public gallery. That means that the only images that people get from the court's oral arguments are these sketches. This watershed moment for Supreme Court transparency has reignited an old debate. Should the arguments also be broadcast by video?
It is the people's court. It's not my court and it's not anyone else's. It's the American people's, and they should be able to see it.
I chair the committee that funds the courts, and I feel some sort of responsibility that I should encourage the court to do the right thing and let people watch how these decisions are made.
There should not be cameras at the Supreme Court. Some advocates may grandstand for media clips, and justices may self-censor their questions in ways that diminish, ultimately, the court's transparency.
I think we have to come to some kind of fair compromise where the court's important work is just more available to the American people in real time.
Video should absolutely be standard at the Supreme Court for its oral arguments and for its opinion announcements.
Video opens a door to unintended consequences. And so I would have the court proceed very slowly there.
The debate over cameras in the court essentially boils down to one between transparency and integrity of oral arguments. Proponents of video say that the court should be held to the same standard as Congress and other government officials, including federal and state courts that have already adopted video. But opponents say that it could change the fundamental nature of oral arguments into making them something less useful than they are now.
I think it's important for the public to be able to see their public servants live in action working across all three branches of government. We're able to see the president all the time. We're able to see Congress.
It's the most important court in the world, the Supreme Court, where 5 people can decide the fate of who's the next president of the United States to whether a law is struck down. You can't watch that.
The Supreme Court is transparent, but in other ways than Congress and the president.
When the Supreme Court acts, it issues lengthy, detailed opinions that go into the precise reasons of each of the justices for how they've approached a case.
If you think about the ways in which Congress and the president are transparent, it's often in the form of giving a speech, and a speech is a finished product.
I feel like there's a fairly good amount of transparency at the Supreme Court. What we don't have is accessibility. We don't have the ability for ordinary citizens to go and see a Supreme Court argument. There are just a few public seats in the courtroom. You got to line up sometimes days in advance. And to me, it's a huge shame because this is the one branch of our government, frankly, that works.
We're never going to have absolute transparency, but I think at the very minimum, we can expect the court to show its work insofar as the American people can see the court actually at work. But I think the real worry that the justices are thinking of is that there will be grandstanding from the advocates and the litigants, maybe even grandstanding from colleagues who are playing it up for the camera.
If there are cameras in the courtroom, I think there is a significant risk that justices will ultimately censor the questions they ask or the comments they make during oral argument because of how those video clips could be used.
You know, the truth is, at the Supreme Court, your argument's going to get sliced and dissected and played in audio on the talk shows anyway. So, you know, I feel like that's already happening to some extent.
You run a very substantial risk that a special interest group would take a comment or statement made by a justice, perhaps as an extreme hypothetical or perhaps a devil's advocate comment, take that from its context and use that in a way to try to portray one or more justices in a particularly negative light.
I also think that you focus on weird things when you see an image. You focus on what the person is wearing, a particular tick, and those really have no place in oral argument.
You can sort of cordon yourself off from the world by not doing video. It seems a little bit weird nowadays, especially when the justices are appearing in public all the time. Any concern that they're going to be lambasted on the cable news, well, first of all, it's already happening.
In front of my committee, the arguments that the justices made against this is that people don't behave the same way when they're on TV. Perhaps that's true, but certainly doesn't push the whole balance of this, of having the transparency here and the educational value.
Just look at how video has gone for other courts of last resort.
All 50 states' top courts allow the use of video in at least some of their proceedings.
Pretty much every modern democracy across the world, their top courts use video.
And even federal appeals courts in New York, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Chicago.
There haven't been any problems with it.
Lots of lower courts have managed to video stream their proceedings without incident. They may not necessarily have the same kind of pickup on cable news that the Supreme Court would have, so I think the media is kind of the wild card here.
The crucial distinction is that the U.S. Supreme Court justices are very well known to the American public. The various interest groups who are focused on issues before the court very much can and will target individual justices with potentially things that they say in oral argument.
Another difference is with state Supreme Courts, many of those justices are elected to their position. And so they have particular reason to have cameras in the courtroom.
I fully respect the justice's decision so far not to have television in the courtroom. I just hope that resistance wanes over the years, as I think it should.
It took a global pandemic for the Supreme Court to come around to even live streaming audio. So when it comes to video, it's not clear when the justices are going to take that next step. It's funny, in his end-of-year address for 2014, Chief Justice Roberts was announcing the court's long-awaited pivot to an electronic docket system, which had been in courts around the country for years. And he pointed out that on the east side of the court's building was the fable of the tortoise and the hare. And so with so many things at the Supreme Court, this might just be another case of slow and steady wins the race.